Howdy, howdy. Sue Devil here, and welcome to our next episode of Essential Units, the Dwarfs versus the Lizardmen. This is nearing the end. We have one more battery of tests I want to go through before we start looking at builds. And really the test I want to go through is to look at our support units, our artillery, gyrocopter with brimstone guns, some of our ranged units, including the trollhammer torpedoes. And I wanted to see how they would do supporting our Lord. This is very similar to, I think, the very first essential units I did 2 years ago almost now. And really it's just meant to see if we can find one of these units between our missile infantry, our gyrocopters, and our artillery that is really going to be a top-notch or standout support unit against a Lord. So what I did was I set up battles against Kroq-Gar, and I just had a Rune Lord with the Rune of Wrath and Rune, and nothing else, and supported by an infantry unit to really try and give the infantry unit the very best chance of hitting Kroq-Gar, because he's hard to hit. He runs around. With the Rune of Wrath and Rune, that slows him, and then I'll engage Kroq-Gar with our Rune Lord and just support with the ranged unit until the Rune Lord is routed and Kroq-Gar just about gets to our ranged unit. Then we'll stop the battle, look at the DPS, and see how they did and see if any units really stand out. Now, may not be the very best test, but again, when you do these sorts of tests, you got to pick something to try and differentiate the units with. Oh. And this is what I did. So we're going to go to the spreadsheet fairly quick, and for those that really don't like the analysis part, I will have a summary at the end, and we will talk about the standout units, and I will run a little battle just for fun. But otherwise, we'll head to the spreadsheet and start digging through the numbers. Alrighty, so the first test I did was Kroq-Gar versus our Rune Lord with Rune of Wrath and Rune, of course, and our Rangers, just to get a baseline for what a basic Ranger can do. That'll be the same as a Quarreler with the great weapons, etc. So I wanted to see how well they could support our Rune Lord before Kroq-Gar killed the Rune Lord or routed him and then came after our ranged units. And the Rune Lord actually is a very good unit to do this. When we did our testing, just Lord versus Lord, the Rune Lord averaged 1 DPS. So before Kroq-Gar murdered him. And the Rune of Wrath and Rune will not do a whole lot of damage to Kroq-Gar, so the DPS numbers are going to be reasonably good. Now, unfortunately, looking at Kroq-Gar's DPS is not really that easy because he's not going to kill the units. I do not want the ranged units involved in that melee confrontation. It'll muck up my numbers. So basically, I took whatever their starting HP was and subtracted the total Rune Lord HP to kind of get an idea of Kroq-Gar's DPS, and this is kind of in that area. It's not exactly correct, but then the gold differential is not a really good number either. What I'm looking at is the DPS and how long the battle lasted and the win-loss ratio. And in the first one, the Rangers really they're not the greatest support unit. They're only doing 13.1 DPS to Kroq-Gar, and he had on average 5,600 hit points left after he killed our Rune Lord and engaged our Rangers. So we'll take a look at the next unit, and that's our Thunders. Now Thunders we know are a very good unit because they're armor piercing and they do a lot of damage. So I was very curious to see how they would perform in this instant. Well, they did definitely do a lot of damage, 34 DPS, basically triple of what the Rangers do. They pulled gold out of that, though it's not the perfect analysis. They did lose everyone, though, when you consider that Kroq-Gar killed our Lord and got to them. But the battle took a long time, and that's because they kind of dinged Kroq-Gar around and maybe knocked him off his game, so he wasn't hitting our Rune Lord quite as much, is what it appeared to be to me. but I mean, this is a common pick against the Lizardmen, and a decent pick. I don't think you're going to go terribly wrong with a Thunder, but there definitely are some better units out there. So the next unit I looked at was the Rangers with great weapons. Now, and I didn't look at Bugman's Rangers, I don't think, or maybe I did. Oh yeah, I did later. But the Rangers with great weapons, they have their throwing axes. They have very little ammo and a very short range. But oh boy, do they do some damage to Crocker and big units in general. 67 DPS. The Rangers with great weapons actually ended up winning 80% of the battles. They were very good support. Now the Rune Lord was pretty beat up, but it was over in 60 seconds on average. So the Rangers with great weapons are really the very first standout unit. And the gold comparison is not exactly correct, but they pulled 800 gold and 791 per minute. So against a big dino, they really stand out as opposed to the Thunders, although they're very short range and they do run out of ammo. Where these guys actually can shine is after they demolish that big dino. You can actually put them into your line fighting, helping support your Longbeards against Saurus warriors, and they do armor piercing damage with their hand weapon as well. They have stock. I mean, they're just an all around standout unit in this situation. We know they can't stand up to a charge, but I was also interested to see exactly how our Althar's Raiders do, and I think they are next. Yes, they are. They did even better. Wow. They still lost one of those, but I did put the Mark of Althar on them, on the Krokkar. They got the job done in 54 seconds. They were doing 76 DPS. They didn't pull out as much net gold, but they pulled out more gold per minute. These Althar's Raiders are just custom built to absolutely melt monstrous units. They are so good. And this Mark of Althar actually has more dual purpose. I mean, it'll help. It reduces the target's defense against missiles and maybe their shield and stuff like this. But what it also does is reduces their armor. So it turns out Althar's Raiders are extremely good in helping your non-armor piercing units get through the defenses of these big units with high armor. This would be, I think, an essential unit in this matchup. They're just so good, and that's where they beat the Rangers with great weapons. They are more expensive at 750 versus 650, but they're still relatively cheap, and that Mark of Althar is extremely good, and they do more damage when they end up having to get into melee than the Rangers with great weapons. But the Rangers with great weapons are good too. I don't think you're going to go wrong if you get an Althar's Raider and one unit of Rangers with great weapons, and that's your whole dinosaur defense, we'll call it. You're not that won't be a mistake. Both these units are very, very good in the pocket, though they have quite short range. So the next unit I looked at is those Bugman's Rangers. So I put the Bugman's Rangers at +1 chevrons because that's they're the essential unit on the edges, and they're going to be at that +1 chevron anyways. And I wanted to see how they would compare to our regular Rangers that were doing 13.1 DPS. Would they be able to do more? And the answer is a little. Instead of doing 13 DPS, they did 17. They did pull some value out of one of those confrontations, but they lost all 5. They just weren't able to knock Krokkar down fast enough, but that's not their purpose. The purpose is to protect the edges, defend the edges, and when that's done, job done, they can just start picking and poking away at the big units or counter skirmishing or doing these other sorts of things, and they're going to be very good at this. They're not great at fighting big dinosaurs, but they're not as bad as Quarrelers or Quarrelers with great weapons or just regular Rangers. It really is these Althar's Raiders are the ones that stand out. Now, the big one I was really interested in was these Trollhammer Torpedoes. We know, aside from being able to do anti-large damage and big burst damage, they do debuff whatever they hit with -10 leadership from being hit with artillery. Like these Bugman's Rangers, Ulthar's Raiders, etc., they will debuff the target with -5 from being hit by arrows, but the Trollhammer Torpedoes does -10 from being hit by artillery. So I was curious as to what their DPS was going to be. And it is big, 71.7, but ironically not as big as the Ulthar's Raiders at 76. They still ended up helping our Lord win 80% of those battles, the same as the Raiders, the same as the regular Rangers, but they do cost 150 more than our Ulthar's Raiders and 250 more than our regular Rangers. What this says to me, and they pulled out 275 gold and 267 per minute. So they're not going to perform as well as these guys, but they are a definite choice. You know, you can bring these guys into that fight confidently if you're going to protect them. We also looked at these guys can't stand up to charges, they can't stand up to flying units coming in, they can't stand up to magic, they can't stand up to infantry, but if you can protect them and they can fire away, they are going to really hurt whatever they hit. They have a very, very high damage per second, even though it takes them a long time to reload. And you know, even a possibility of shooting and scooting, you know, shooting and then running away while your reload's ticking and then repositioning might be effective. But these Trollhammer Torpedoes, the one thing that you need with Trollhammer Torpedoes that you don't need with the Ulthar's Raiders is you need a protecting unit, like a unit of just regular Dwarf Warriors or something like that, to stay in front of them at all times or behind them and protect them from charges or infantry or big dinosaurs getting through. But they are definitely a choice and will fit into your build, whatever it is, capably. They can do a really good job, but you do really have to watch over them. So I went to the artillery next, and how I would set this up is I set the artillery up as far away as I could get it, so that the artillery would get in two or three shots before Krokkar even arrived to start fighting our Rune Lord, and got that Runerath Rune on, which slowed him down. So I wanted to see how they would do in that scenario. It was really an optimum situation. They have the maximum amount of time to shoot, as they would when the Lizardmen were coming into your line, unless you were having some kind of artillery battle versus their artillery. And then as soon as Krokkar beat our Rune Lord and then got just about to the bolt thrower or cannon or whatever I looked at, then I would stop the fight. I was kind of a little disappointed. The bolt throwers were only doing 12 DPS, and the thing is, they went as high as 21 and as low as 4. And the reason that is because Krokkar is a little janky. He jumps around and sometimes he's hard to hit. The thing is about artillery is this 550 gold is a much cheaper way than the Trollhammer Torpedo to get that debuff on something. So that's more value than just its DPS, because that extra -5 leadership, it can send their make it so that the Lizardmen lose control of their units, or can help rout them off. So, you know, looking at this, even though this is a losing proposition, it might not be so bad. And in addition, it actually puts a target in your back line. So let's say you didn't really want to bring artillery for the point of knocking them down a lot, but really you wanted to put a target in your back line so that you forced them to try and infiltrate your back line and try and get to that bolt thrower and shut it down so you could collapse with your Slayers. That's not an awful strategy, and the bolt thrower would be a very cheap way to do that, and it can debuff and it can do damage. I mean, if I think in this one where they did 21.7, Krokkar was just wasn't moving around a whole lot, and the bolt thrower definitely landed some shots and pulled a little value out of that. So the next thing I wanted to look at is the cannon. I mean, I love cannons. They have great range. They're anti-large. They're good against armored infantry and cav and everything else like that. They're just an all-around good unit. So how did they do? And they were a very long ways when I started the fight, so it took Crocker quite a while to get to my Rune Lord to start the fight there. Well, not that great. They only pulled an average of 19 DPS, damage per second, as opposed to the bolt thrower at 12. I do know cannons have other uses. I mean, you could put one cannon in your back line, and I don't think it would be a giant mistake, but it appears there are generally better units. But depending on your build and what you're trying to achieve, this might not be an awful thing to do. You know, you can go after Revivification Crystal or their artillery, or, you know, a Flying Lord or something, and do some damage over time to them. They did pull positive value out of 2 of these fights, and you know, the battle took longer because Crocker had to come further. They do start firing a lot earlier, and they do have a lot more options than the bolt thrower in terms of how fast they can damage, you know, heavily armored units. Like, let's say they Lizardmen happen to bring, you know, horned ones for some reason. I mean, they could knock half their health off before they ever get to your line. So I love artillery, but you know, the artillery is not performing at a high level in this test. So then I looked at the organ gun. I was interested to see how that did. The organ gun got a substantial nerf in the Tomb King's patch. So how did it do? You know, not bad. Didn't pull any positive value out of any of these. It did do 22 DPS, which is slightly higher than the cannon. It's certainly not pulling the gold the cannon is. I would say this organ gun is not really well suited for this matchup in general. I mean, it can mow down, like, an organ guns are awesome when they hit and they mow down entire infantry units or cavalry units or whatnot. And even despite it doing the highest DPS, it pulled a lot less gold than the cannon or the bolt thrower in general. So I would say this is a do not bring type of unit for this purpose. If you have another purpose for the organ gun, it might be very good in that role. The next thing I looked at was the Gyrocopter with the Brimstone gun. The Brimstone gun is anti-large. The Gyrocopters can fly around. I know they don't have a lot of DPS. I mean, in a lot of my earlier testing, that's what we saw. But they do add a lot of mobility and options for the Dowie. So how did they do? I just let my Gyrocopter get there early, backed off my Lord a ways, and tried to pump as many shots into Crocker as I could. Didn't really do very good, actually. It was worse than the organ gun even. Gyro's only 10.8 DPS. Of course, this is not with the bombs, and Gyrocopters have other units. But for this purpose, their anti-large purpose, they just weren't getting the job done. And, you know, there are other uses for the Gyrocopter, so this is a very specific test that is testing for a specific outcome to see what these units will do. But the Gyrocopter, over a long battle, just picking away, using your bombs in good places, maybe to pick up some skirmishers or these types of things, the Gyrocopter can pull a lot more value in a battle. But in this situation, not a fantastic pick. The last thing I wanted to look was the Master Engineer. Just having the Master Engineer support the Rune Lord. The Master Engineer apparently got a little buff in the Tomb King's drop. If you followed my channel, was incredibly disappointed with the Master Engineer. The 2 units I was really disappointed with when Warhammer 1 was released was the Ironbreaker and the Master Engineer. And right now the Ironbreakers are in a beautiful spot. They're perfect. They're exactly what I imagined, and they're amazing. So how did the Master Engineer do? Not great. You know, I even put the ballistics calibration buff on him, and he used it every time, where he gets the, you know, the 40% reload rate and everything like that. He just couldn't reliably hit Crocker. I mean, this one where he got 0.3 DPS, that's kind of what the Runesmith does, so he didn't hit him at all, most likely. I lost a lot of gold. Now, there are other uses for the Master Engineer. He does a little better when he's shooting into blobs of infantry, and he does have potential buffs, but he doesn't appear to be a good pick in this matchup for this purpose. So those were the units I looked at. So the ones that really stood out were those Ulthar's Raiders, the Rangers with great weapons. The Thunders were good, decent. There's nothing wrong with the Thunders, and those Trollhammer Torpedoes. So we will go back in game and we'll set up a quick fight just for fun to see what we can do if we try to maximize our DPS against Kroq-Gar. Alright, so just again to summarize, the 4 standout units, there was no artillery that really stood out, and nor the Gyrocopter. The 4 standout units against their dinosaurs, against Kroq-Gar specifically, were definitely Rangers with great weapons. They are the cheapest of the 4, and they have a ton of DPS. They unload it really fast. The problem is they have very short range at 75 and only 8 ammunition, but the positive is they do have armor piercing weapon damage, so after they've used all their ammo, they can go and support an infantry engagement, though they would not do wonderfully in a one-on-one infantry engagement. Thunders pull a lot less value than I thought they would, but they're not bad. I mean, they're not a bad choice at all. It really is these Ulthar's Raiders that stood out, I think. I mean, the Rangers, the great weapons, and the Ulthar's Raiders both stood out, but the Ulthar's Raiders, the one big thing they do is this marked by Ulthar, and that minus 30 armor, particularly if you have your non-armor piercing units also helping in that engagement, can make a massive difference very fast. And then of course the Iron Drakes, the Trollhammer Torpedoes, do a ton of damage, but they are very vulnerable, so they require protection. Like if you were going to bring Iron Drakes into the fight, you would have to have, you know, maybe just some Dwarf Warriors, and those Dwarf Warriors are going to be stuck like glue to wherever those Iron Drakes are, in front of them or behind them, just to try and protect them specifically and not get into the fight at all till the very end of the battle if you're going to do so. So we have Kroq-Gar here, and were we on Glacial Lake? I think so. The battle I wanted to show you, the fun battle, is we'll take our Rune Lord, get rid of our abilities with the exception of Master Rune, Wrath, and Rune for that minus 48% speed debuff. We'll use our Ulthar's Raiders, our Thunders, and our Dragonback Slayers. So Dragonback Slayers, again, you have to think of these Dragonback Slayers as almost like a mount for your Lords, because your Lords just can't stand up against any of the big dinos. And if we set this all up just right, how fast can we kill Kroq-Gar? How fast can we rout him? Well, rout him. Let's go see. And just for interest's sake, I've already set up a base package and just been testing it a little bit here and there. And I did get into an online battle, just a kind of a fun custom battle online, and have already got a little bit of testing done, and it's, you know, it's been very, very fun. So okay, we are locking those guys together with the Ulthar's Raider back here. For the ancestors. Where do we go? Okay, so let's just start that battle. We'll let Kroq-Gar get close. Okay, now, okay, he's not quite in. So we're at this. So I want to hit him with the Rune of Wrath and Rune to slow him down. Hit him with that marked by Ulthar. Again, it reduces his missile resistance, but also that minus 30 armor makes it so the Dragonback Slayers who don't have armor piercing can do more damage to him. So we will get these guys shooting, these guys shooting, and these guys fighting. Let's go here. Okay, so we're up 5936, and let's go a little bit forward. Now you see here, we're already, if we look at Kroq-Gar, you can see, does he got flammable, cold? He's already put his cold-blooded, but you can see his leadership's at 8. He's been damaged by artillery, and he's under missile fire. So that's kind of what gets his leadership down so low so fast. And you know, these guys will just go to town. So, and you can see how quickly he melts, and there he is getting ready to rout, and there he goes. So 59:18, where are we at? 59:40. I don't know, really less than 30 seconds, very reliably. If you were going to bring this backline combo, putting them together to fight any big dino is crushing. But again, you have to protect those iron drakes. And real battles against real people don't go precisely like this, but I just wanted to show how quickly you can get Crocker routing, or the big units routing in general. So, and again, it is that damage by artillery and the under missile fire, which is net a -15 leadership, which is really, really strong. So, yeah, I think those two units in the backline are extremely fun. They can do a ton of damage. I don't know if that's the very best, but really there is only one essential unit in this entire test, I believe, and that is the Ulthar's Raiders. I think they are a must include in any dwarf army against the Lizardmen. You know, of course, there's a chance where they go with a Mass Saurus build or anything like this, and these guys won't quite be as good, but they're still going to demolish a Lord. Even if he's on foot, it's going to be painful. You know, because it's not like they have anti-large with their missile damage, so they don't have to worry about that. They can really, really demolish things, or they can use their missiles on their high-value armored targets if there's no big dinos. They are just a great unit, and with this unit in your backline, in the pocket, they're fast. You know, they do have 33 speed and can get around, and they have stock and Vanguard deployment if you would ever need it. I mean, they just have a lot of very good things, and they give you a ton of flexibility. I'm not saying don't use artillery. Artillery is definitely an option. I would say the bolt thrower and the cannon are both an option. I don't know if I would take more than one, though I've seen it done. I think you have better choices than just the one. I think I would take the one, like, you know, if I'm going to take artillery, I might take one bolt thrower just for that debuff, so they could cycle through their big units and try to route them off one by one, or to use it to help keep a unit routing, to keep that debuff on them, or the cannon, which would basically serve the same purpose, but it'd be a little more effective, but it is a lot more expensive. As soon as you have a cannon, you know, it's more expensive than your option of rangers, and for 100 more you get iron drakes. The big advantage is that range, though. That range is no joke. 440 range is very good. But as far as supporting your Lord with a ranged unit, whether it is artillery, a gyrocopter, or missile infantry, really the standout here are the Ulthar's Raiders, and I would definitely say they are an essential unit. So for the next episode, which will probably be the last, we'll see if I might do an update from time to time. We're going to look at some builds, and I'll try and put them through their paces, and we'll take a look at how they operate as a cohesive unit, and I'll give some suggestions as to a few builds. I think I got 3 or 4 or 5 builds, and where you can really use a lot of creativity while still maintaining those units that get a big stat advantage. The Lizardmen matchup in general, I think, is has to have the Dowie as the favorite, just because the Dowie have all the answers to the Lizardmen in general. I think, anyways, from the testing that I've seen. But we'll take a look at some of that in the next episode. If you found that interesting, leave a comment down below. If you use Ulthar's Raiders on a regular basis, just because you like them, or you found they've been through practice that they've been a very good unit for you, I'd love to hear about it. And if you haven't ever used them before, and you see this and you go into an online battle and you happen to get up against the Lizardmen, you know, let me know how you thought they performed in the fight for you. I think that would be really fun. And that's about it. So I'll see you in the next video where we'll look at the builds, and have a good one.